Welcome to the Fanny Chat podcast with me, Naomi Gale, the show where we go so far deep within our own vaginas that we wonder whether we will ever return to socialization ever again. So I am here recording, as I always share, on the road, living in a van with my family while we navigate what we're looking for. I'm currently sitting in Morocco. We've been in Morocco coming up 4 months now. I can hear the road, so you might be able to hear that too. There is a breeze and I can see the sea. There are a lot of surfers in the sea today. I really should be one of them, but instead I'm enjoying more of a cozy time. It's kind of what my nervous system needs right now as we've been trying to make some big life decisions for our next year. So I wanted to share all things resentment this episode, and it was one of the topics that I was kind of really thinking about. I've got a few topics I want to talk about on. This one really spoke to me this week. So we're going to dive into it. We're looking at what is the anger underneath our functioning and what is that really trying to say? And it's often really not what we think. So look, I am a huge believer, having witnessed many women in ceremony, that the body holds on to the information in ways that we are still really behind in when it comes to science. So let's think about the women who I've chatted to and how through somatic practices for hours and hours and hours. And then suddenly when we work with the fascia in the vagina, the information is there without us having to be in our heads anymore. And often what comes up in the walls of the vagina is resentment. So one of the things that will come up is that we're actually functioning, but we're like quietly angry and resentful of certain aspects of our lives. And the list for the aspects that we're resentful for are endless. Like I could spend ages exploring some of the resentments that have been spoken to. I don't know if that's the right word, some of the resentments, but some of the topics that have been spoken to from in that space. And what we find is that often that when we speak to it, it comes from the walls of the vagina. And for those of you that don't understand really or can viscerally understand what I'm talking to, only really the women who I suppose have navigated it in my spaces really can see it. And those who have done online workshops with me are pretty astounded by what comes up from the work. And the work is essentially allowing ourselves to unravel from this patriarchal societal pressure of trying to remain in the knowing that what I'm speaking to is bullshit. Basically, it's like, can you soften into and trust into this process and remove the barriers that have been created for you, where your knowing exists from within your pelvis is a genuine exploration. And often what happens is in life that we are almost embarrassed or unable to access that because we're too in our heads, or we just can't really believe what we're hearing. And a lot of women who come and work with me in my space often say that they're like really taken aback by how it works. And I like to describe it as therapy, like counseling, but through the vagina. So when we're in the space, we've worked together and we've unraveled and we've gone on a journey together to understand what the holding pattern is, then we start to soften into the space together. And then what happens is that when we're almost kind of like, it's almost like a breathwork journey to an extent, because you will have this outer body kind of experience where you allow yourself to come into your knowing and everything drops. And it's not like in a breathwork journey where oxygen rises and carbon dioxide decreases, and then it's like finding that knowledge through the oxygen. But what we're finding is the knowledge through the fascia, and then it rises and then it comes up and it bubbles up because we're holding it and we allow ourselves to let it go. And so that's what happens when we work with the vagina, and that's exactly what my pelvic floor journey is now about, because I'm traveling and because I'm no longer holding women in person, and based on our current projections of what we're going to do and looking at what I'm trying to move away from within the UK system, it's probably clear that I will remain online with this work. And so to access this work now means this really beautiful journey that I've created, that I've taken women on many times through holding them on a one-to-one, but it means you can access it in a self-paced way and have access to me within it without having to do anything more than be in my words and my holding and exist in the knowing that you are understood. And so that journey, you can find a link below in the podcast, or you can find it on my Substack, you can find it on my website, which I have just tweaked and I'm very proud of. So let's meet Claire. Claire is 43. She has has a good life. She knows she has what everyone would call a good life, and her husband tells her, we have a good life. And her mother, when she calls, reminds her that she has a good life. Claire works 4 days a week. She negotiated that and she is super proud. She gets to have Mondays off, which means she has a whole day to herself where she gets shit done. She organises the weekly to-do list, remembers when the MOT is due, phones the companies who are in charge of her utilities when they need attention, like, hey, the Wi-Fi shit. We promised the best of the best. She rings them, tries to work it out. She is the one that books the holidays because, yes, she can afford a yearly getaway, and sometimes they even go away at weekends. She manages the children's admin. She knows which child needs new plimsolls at school. Sorry, the last ones are only used 5 times in one term, and now they're too small. So she understands which child also might need help with friendship. There's one that might need more support with a friendship issue that's coming up. And she could also see where the gaps are in the reading for her smallest. She is a mother of 3 children. It is not clear, if it is really not clear here, Claire holds the invisible architecture of the entire family. And her husband, well, he's a good man. He helps when he's asked. He does his share. When he's directed, he loves her deeply, and he reminds her how grateful he is of her. And Claire loves him. And Claire is quietly, persistently, almost imperceptibly furious. Like furious. But she doesn't call it fury. She calls it tired. She says she's stressed. She says she's fine. Like, hey, I'm actually fine. I'm fine. I am fine. But then in the car sometimes alone at the end of the day when she did everything and was like, thanks for nothing, because that's the invisible labor, right? When he and she sat down for a moment and she made a cup of tea, and when he didn't ask her, hey, how did the call with BT go with the Wi-Fi issue on her Monday off? Something moves through her that she just doesn't want to name, because naming it would mean like then something exists, and Claire doesn't have time for whatever that might mean. So culturally, as women, we have resentment, and we have seen it as a character flaw. And sometimes we find our mothers living in resentment, and we understood that as little girls, our mothers didn't name it. So Claire's mother reminds her that she has a good life to double down on her ignorance of her own resentment. And I'm not saying that she has ignorance in the same way as just being ignorant. I'm saying that she either has ignorance because she doesn't want to name it, she either has ignorance because she hasn't seen it, or she either has ignorance because she wants to name it, but naming it would then mean having to go on a whole journey, and she isn't really prepared to do that. So what she can feel, the mother, is bubbling, but she wants Claire to remember that she has a good life. Nope, not a great one, but she has a good one, and to suck it up. Because Claire, right, you can't admit the resentment, because if she admits it, then as the mother, she will have to admit to herself, and that just cannot happen. Remember, Claire chose this life, right? She really chose it, and she should just manage it better. She should just go to therapy. She should just do the work, and she should just process the anger. That's it. And women do. So let's be honest, right? Women go to therapy. Women read the books. Women understand the invisible load intellectually, but they just can't name it perfectly. There's a really great song, Labour, by Paloma Paris, and I love singing that song. You know, the white picket fence, this is what I'm here for. It's like we can all feel it, right? And Paloma Paris has been to quite a few marches, shared her music. It does well because people can feel what Paloma is sharing, right? Or is it Paris Paloma, what Paris is sharing? I say Paloma because I have a daughter called Paloma. But yes, it's Paris Paloma, and Paloma is the second. Maybe it's her middle name. I haven't looked it up. So basically what we're seeing is that then women, they can feel it, but then they just come home and still do everything. And then they also feel ashamed for feeling it because they've done the work and they know they're still angry, which must mean something is wrong. And that's the trap, right? Because resentment isn't the flaw. Resentment is like ding, 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 the signal. It's the body's most honest response to a sustained mismatch between what you're giving and what you're receiving. And that is resentment. Okay, so it's not bitterness, it's not ingratitude, it's your system actually trying to tell you something. It's like, hey, it's not been right, and it's really not been right for a long time. And then you go, oh shit. And then the problem is not that the women really, really deeply feel it. It's a problem that they've built their lives on top of it without ever asking what that resentment is trying to say. So it kind of feels almost impossible to undo. We literally sit on the resentment in our pelvis and ignore what it's saying. That is what I've witnessed with women. Resentment, it just has nowhere to go. It doesn't disappear, and it doesn't just process when you're asleep, or it doesn't just process in counseling sessions. It has to actually go somewhere because it's a constant situation that you're living with, right? So sometimes we feel it in the jaw, sometimes we feel it in the shoulders, sometimes we feel it in the pelvic floor, because the pelvic floor braces because the body has learned for a long time that it has to hold on to everything. And it generally goes to the heart of the body, the center of the body, in the pelvis. So we grip, we manage, we hold, we don't let go. And Claire's pelvis, it's not broken. It's doing exactly what Claire has been doing for the last however many years that she can reflect back on as holding everything. Probably as a child, holding everything with her mother. So when we talk about this, when we talk about the pelvic floor, I'm not talking about Kegel exercises, and this is not a clinical fix. That's not what I believe in, and that's not what any of this work is, and that's not what the journey is that I've created, and it's not what the work is for the last however many 10, 12 years I've been doing. It's a real slow, honest approach of asking the body what it has been carrying, and it's often what has been refused to be named, because that body will hold the information, but how do we find it? And that's what this work is. So when Claire came to see me, remember these are all fictitious characters. When Claire came to see me, what she wanted was a quick fix for her pelvic floor. Like, she had a bit of a leak scenario. And I've had this so many times. I just want to, look, Naomi, I just don't want to wee myself a little bit. All right? I don't want to be when I'm 60 and it getting worse. I'm not here to just deal with that. I just want you to fix it. And she financially could work with me. So she wanted some pragmatic work. And that made total sense to her. She was looking for a quick fix. Because look, she's done some therapy. She just needs to fix the weeing a little bit, yeah? And then everything will be fine. Everything will be fine. And she saw my work. She said, to herself, that aligns more than going to physio. I don't want to go to physio. I don't want to go to clinical. I've done the work. I'm a bit into the holistic therapy. I want to see if this works first before having to go down a more formal route. She chose me first over the formal. So when we start to work together, Claire quickly realizes that this work is actually not about the pelvic floor. It's really not about quick fix. And resentment came to the surface. So when we would have worked together, this would have been covered, and Claire would have been, as often the women I have had in the past are like, I'm absolutely prepared to do what it takes. But really, you can't really know what you're entering into until you start that journey. Even though I can try and explain it, I can try and explain it here in this podcast. I can try and explain it through the archetypes of these different women. I can try and explain it through all the different types of ways that I've tried to explain it over the last 12 years. But that will not explain it for you or for Claire in this situation. Now, Claire was livid in our sessions. I could feel her anger and her frustration directed at me. How fucking dare you, Naomi? How fucking dare you, Naomi, allow for this emotion to rise when I'm paying you just to allow my pelvis to function? Yeah, fuck you. Fuck you. I can hear it. The resentment. Now you're fucking angry at me, because you can't be angry at anything else, because that doesn't feel right. I'm angry at you for bringing this resentment to the table. And above all else, she knew that resentment was going to come. She, underlying all of it, she knew that was going to happen, but she wasn't prepared to admit that was going to happen, right? And she probably didn't even know it was going to happen. This is all a subconscious knowing, right? So then what happened is that when we were within the vagina, it came up as mother wound challenges. It came up as discussions about how she really does love her husband, convincing herself of that love, which obviously exists, but she also does resent him and doesn't want to label that. And it's really not the partner's fault either. It's not the husband's fault either, because he is part of a system brought up by mothers who also overrode their frustration and also learned that their modelling at home from their fathers was just that the mother holds. Even though they're absolutely aware of it, or they try their hardest not to be the same, it's still culturally there. And that is the challenge. And over time, Claire has to soften into her resentment by being heard and held in it, because that's exactly what that space is for, and that's exactly what her husband would want. But she can't label it for herself. So if she can't label it for herself, then how is he going to be able to exercise that change, right? So there is nothing to change. There is never anything to change. It's simply to be acknowledged. And then guess what happened to her pelvic floor once she was acknowledged in that resentment? So if you recognize, Claire, if you recognize that quiet anger, that life looks all right, but still feels slightly off, maybe you also have challenges with your pelvic floor similar to Claire, I'm not going to tell you to do anything more. I'm not going to tell you to leave. Who would tell you to do that? Who would tell you to have the conversation? Who would tell you to set the boundary? Because you already know all of that. Not about the leaving part. That's maybe for some women, that's where it ends up heading. But in general, this is simply about being held. So I want to offer this instead. Right? What if resentment isn't actually the problem? What if the most useful piece of information that your body has is right there in the center of your pelvis? And what would change if, instead of managing it and processing it, being ashamed of it, wanting to not admit it, what about like being curious about it instead? Not having to do anything, just openly curious. What would that feel like? So really thinking about this with the partner, right? Because it's not what he did, not what he needs to change, not what the whole system needs to change for her, not about major changes in schedules, but it's really about what you have been abandoning in order to keep everything running. Because it starts with admitting that you need, first and foremost, something, and no one else can do that for you. And if you don't know what that need is, then you're never going to be able to model that for anybody else. So the partner, when we're talking about the partner, he genuinely wants to understand because he loves Claire, he adores Claire, but he can't even express that fully because she won't open up to what's coming up for her. And so it's like a cycle. The mother adores Claire and hasn't seen how she hasn't broken the generational pattern of holding with a stiff upper lip, right? But the mother, actually, this mother of Claire's, would actually love to soften that. But she still feels like she needs to hold Claire in her resentment. She knows Claire is resentful. She can see that because she already experienced that. And now she, as the mother, feels she has to hold Claire in her resentment because she knows how that feels. And then what happens is that she has to keep reminding her, Claire, you have a good life, because she also had a good life. But actually, what would happen if Claire admitted the resentment and admitted that to her mother and allowed her mother to soften into that as well? What would happen to the holding pattern for both of those women in that situation? In this situation with Claire, with this mother that she has, actually, that could look like a really beautiful reciprocal process. Not for everyone, obviously. So the real work begins there. Just acknowledgement. Now, when I spoke about the pelvic floor journey, I see this pelvic floor journey that I've created as like a bridge for women like Claire, because we all know, if you're in this work and you've experienced this work, and I know, and you really know, your gnosis is that the pelvis cannot be separate. It's where everything lives. It's like when we look at women in general and what they're holding, it comes up through so many different challenges within the pelvis. And Claire would never have come to see this resentment, likely never, if she hadn't have come to work with the vagina. So that gripping that she had, the overfunctioning that they had, the body that couldn't quite soften, like Claire's load existed there, and she needed this journey to be able to unravel and to be heard in it. And that's exactly why I've written this pelvic floor journey in the first place. So I'm here for any questions or any support on that you might have around starting that journey like Claire has. Sending so much love from Morocco, and I really hope that something landed in there, at least for your day, and that you can be witnessed in whatever is going on for you there. And until the next episode.